Working with people who self-neglect and hoard has a high impact on us as practitioners. We would like you to view this short video and think about how it might connect with your own experiences and feelings, and how this might get under your skin, which might be different from other experiences we have as practitioners.
Good morning. My name is Shabnam Ahmed and I'm a social worker and team manager in the London Borough of Camden.
Hello, good morning. My name is Martin Hampton and I'm an integrated care social worker with the London Borough of Camden.
So, welcome to our webinar titled Sense of Self-Neglect. Now, we really hope that the video hasn't lost us any viewers. We both acknowledge and appreciate that the content in that video can feel quite overwhelming. Even when I watched it back, I found it overwhelming. But for those of us that work alongside people that self-neglect and hoard, we know that this is a very difficult area to work in. It's that dark subject matter, one which presents practitioners with many challenges. It's one which makes us very interested, but one which is very evocative. And that's why we asked you to think about your feelings. And you have the opportunity to send us some of those feelings through the comments box. No one else will see that, but we will see those. Martin, isn't it also a very important area for research?
Yeah, absolutely. The James Lind Alliance Priority Setting Partnership for Adult Social Work, forwarded by Lim Romeo, the Chief Social Worker, set out 10 priorities for adult social work research, and one of them, Shabnam, was what are the most effective ways for adult social workers to work with people who self-neglect. So it's a very important area.
Absolutely. So if we haven't succeeded in bringing self-neglect and hoarding through the cameras into your rooms, office space, if you're working from home, wherever you're watching us from. If we haven't brought the topic alive for you, we've certainly got a lot more in store, so that's a warning.
And there'll be lighter moments as well, such as
Absolutely. So we've been really ambitious with our agenda today, and we may not be able to give everything the depth that we would like to, but what we've done is we've put in extensive references, and we've also put our contact details, so please feel free to contact us. So some of the things we will aim to cover today are, we want to cover the definitions. So how is hoarding and self-neglect defined? And we want to do that with you quite creatively. How research informs us. So relaying information from valuable sources such as lead thinkers, Professor Michael Preston Shue, Susie Bray, Dr. Orr, the Recovery College, Research and Practice for Adults. We want to aim to do that. We want to talk about the challenges. We know this is an area that presents many challenges, so we'll cover some of that. We're going to touch on the law, but more so on mental capacity. We are going to share practical tools with you, tools that we both use, but also we've seen other people use and what research suggests. And very importantly, we're going to talk about the importance of good quality and supervision. So what we're hoping is that we'll be igniting or reigniting the curiosity around this dark subject matter. We hope that you will take away at least one, if not more, thoughts or tools that you may use to enhance your practice. It may just confirm your existing excellent practice, because we know there's a lot of good practice out there, particularly in Camden if we're biased. Also, if you're about a student who's going to thinking of a dissertation topic, or if you're someone who's interested in doing a PhD, this may be a subject that's of interest to you. So Martin, tell me, how did you become interested in this subject?
Well, thank you for asking, Shabnam. Well, first of all, the professional practice educator, Sally Neiman, passed on the research and practice for adults, or RIPFA, two of them that I think are excellent. One was on hoarding, one was on self-neglect. I started to realise that people and possessions have a very complex relationship. And I think what immediately interested me was that hoarding had a huge impact on my caseload, as I'm sure it does on yours. It really does lay heavy on a social worker's caseload. It demands a high level of training and information and support and research. And in terms of integrated working, it demands multi-agency team working. And it needs an awareness of how human beings mediate our life through objects, and how possessions can become a part of who we are.
Absolutely.
Why this goes spectacularly wrong, Shabnam, with some people means that we I think have to look again and reinvent and pull up the theories of Freud, or to look at attachment, to think about melancholia and mourning, perhaps to think about bion and containment. All these are very useful. So
we're going to touch on them later.
Shabnam, how did you become interested in this subject?
So Martin, it's probably about 5 years ago, and I became interested in mindfulness first, and then that really helped me to apply the principle of stop, pause, and think. And I've been with the Camden Council for 21 years now. So, and I've been in various roles, but often I've worked in frontline duty systems. So I was on duty one day, and I heard a colleague, and I had the same name that I had worked with someone when I was newly qualified. And I thought to myself, I stopped, I paused, and I thought, there must, the issues that the person was raising was the same as when I worked with them, of hoarding and self-neglect. And I thought there must be a different approach, Are we getting it right? I thought to myself. And as I've always said to you, Martin, there's no such things as coincidence. So Sally again, Sally Neiman, the wonderful Sally, emailed us and she invited us to a workshop that Professor Michael Preston Shute was running, and it was on this very topic. And for me, that was a light bulb moment. It really made me realise that I hadn't actually kept abreast current research and what evidence was saying in this area, and I hadn't been applying that to my practice with self-neglect. And as I said, since then, I did, and my practice was harnessed, and the outcomes were different. So I realised how important it was, and my interest in the area just intensified, like yourself, Martin. So that's how I became interested in it, Martin.
So going on from that, Shabnam, can you tell me how you would define self-neglect?
Sure, Mark, sure. I'd actually like to show our viewers.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I'll share a video with you. You could peel the dirt with your fingernails. My skin's a festering sore. I haven't washed for 40 days. My clothes are growing mold. The cavities are gnawing. Decay is costing teeth. Lice is bedding in my scalp. Sleep brings no relief. Urine stings like sulphur. My breath's an acid flame. Bedsheets sour the atmosphere. My limbs are turning lame. This illness will consume me. These bones, this ashen face. Shade and light confound me. Nights run into days. They're banging on my door again. Or is it just the voices in my head? My train is coming. Death is looming, I can tell. I am 21 and my life's a living hell. So, Martin, I wanted to present the definition through poetry, imagery, and music, as I think it makes it self-explanatory.
Yeah.
There are various definitions of self-neglect, all similar, slightly different words used, but I chose the written one that I shared because it makes reference to intentional and unintentional. And I like that, Martin, because many people ask me, oh, surely the images we've just shared, surely this is unintentional self-neglect, surely the person doesn't have capacity. But you and I both know self-neglect and hoarding can be extremely intentional,
Absolutely.
purposeful,
Yeah.
and meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the poem and the imagery showed several areas which fall under the category of self-neglect. So you had skin, you had the nails, you had the hair, but it's also talked about the emotions from the person's point of view. As you saw, it said, I'm 21 and my life's a living hell. So it isn't just an older person's phenomenon. So research has shown that people who self-neglect have a fivefold increased chance of death if self-neglect is not addressed.
Wow.
We know that people may self-neglect due to a variety of reasons, and there's no one explanation. But research has given us some information, and we know that it could be physical reasons. So it might be that a functional impairment means the person is unable to look after themselves the way they used to, but may feel embarrassed to reach out for help. It could be mental health difficulties or cognitive impairment. So as a result of memory impairment, someone's forgetting to wash, dress, eat, constituting self-neglect. I would say homelessness is an area, and I know you're working with someone at the moment, Martin.
Absolutely.
And if people are living on the streets, then where is the means to wash, access to nutrition, to have their nails done, hair, all those things. If someone's suffering from depression and there's lost all motivation, then demotivation is another factor. There's also different standards. It's always interesting me when referrals come through and you see someone describing something, and then when you go and visit, you think, actually, it's not that bad. So I think there are different standards. Standards will vary. Some people bathe twice a day, other people bathe once a week. Yeah. So, some people might say my house is very clean, others might say, oh, it's not clean at all. So there is something about standards. I think also sometimes we just don't know, Martin. There's uncertainty. Research also suggests loss and social isolation. Yes. Play a key role, or a traumatic event. So it's important to think about when the person started self-neglecting. And then sometimes it's a lack of skills, Martin. So I worked with a Bangladeshi gentleman who said his wife did everything for him, cleaned for him, cooked for him, and prior to that it was his mother. So when his wife died, he just started to self-neglect. I'd also like to mention, I had another one there, I was thinking about this, and that's poverty. Yes. I think my relational activist colleagues will agree with me that poverty can result in all sorts of disadvantage. We know that. We know impoverishment impacts opportunities and health. And then if someone has care needs, Martin, then we have a system which assesses for contribution, don't we? Monetary contribution. And if they're already struggling, then this is an additional cost which they may feel unable to make. And as a result, self-neglect, choose not to have care. I know many people that I've worked with will just stop their care. So I think it's really important to think about what Alex Fox says here. I loved his book, I know you've read it too, The Invisible Asylum. And he says, think about your systems. Are they asset-based? Yeah. Are they future-focused? Do they connect people? Do they really connect people? So I think poverty is another, I don't have the research to say it links to self-neglect, but I think that's an interesting area, Martin. So you tell me, Martin, what about hoarding? How are we going to define hoarding for our viewers?
Well, absolutely. And thank you very much, Shabnam. I'd just like to start by saying that I'm working with somebody at the moment who's hoarded himself out of 2 houses and a van, and who's now sleeping on the streets in Camden. Hoarding, the hoarding definition, hoarding is defined as the acquisition of and failure to disregard possessions that appear to be useless or of limited value. We also mentioned in a little bit the World Health Organization, which classified hoarding as a medical disorder quite recently. In terms of the statistics, there are many statistics on hoarding. A third of people who die in house fires in the UK are from hoarding. And as I've just mentioned, hoarding is now recognised as a distinct mental health difficulty on its own. Mm. Many people who hoard are isolated, and many people would have suffered a life trauma. It affects people of all ages and all demographics, but it usually starts around the age of 11 to 15 and progressively gets worse with age. It tends to affect both genders equally, but more often people who struggle with stuff or with hoarding are unmarried, and they're much more likely to be impaired by a physical health condition or to have comorbidities. Some research indicates that the behavioural tendencies to acquire and retain possessions can be seen as operating on a continuum from normal or adaptive to excessive and pathological. So in other words, that there's a continuum of average saving and then perhaps collecting and then perhaps cluttering and then leading on to hoarding. But there's also very strong evidence that hoarding and collecting are actually separate and discrete. So for example, Shabnam, in hoarding, there's avoidance of discard and the whole unstructured and excessive addition across object categories.
Like someone's photographs, yeah?
Such as a photograph. So you'll see a lot of newspapers, a lot of clothes, and you'll also see you might see quite expensive items put next to, soiled items together. Whilst in collecting, of course, there is discard by trading. The collection tends to be themed and structured, and there's generally a kind of organised display. Now that might take over the whole house, but it tends to be associated with a kind of much more low emotional distress, and particularly a low kind of functional or relational impairment. And I think that it's really worth thinking about that phrase, functional impairment, and that I think the people that we tend to come across who are really struggling with stuff, Shabnam, have extreme functional impairment. Some of them don't seem to have distress, the fact that they can't go to the toilet or they can't use the kitchen. And some people have used the phrase egosyntonic, whereas other people are very ashamed and distressed, but they cannot make the decisions needed to deal with it, and they might be known as ego dystonic. So they're still unable to make the decision to let go of belongings or possessions. One of the things that we might want to think about, kind of in terms of reinventing from theories, Byron, I think, wrote two very interesting books for if we look at hoarding. One is, of course, is learning from experience, and the other is a theory of thinking. But the idea of a cave, and I think this is important because I have had people I work with talk to me, and you actually use that very word. And the idea is that if there is a containing psychic function of all this stuff, what's going to happen if we go in with a deficit model and just remove it all? And then Shabnam, that will definitely lead to uncontainment, will definitely lead to psychic distress, and then will definitely lead to recidivism. So the idea of a cave, I think, is quite important. And if we look at this next clip.
Oh, I'm absolutely stuck now because it's only about just enough room for me to squeeze through here. Oh, blimey! Christ! Oh! This is getting ridiculous now.
It takes Richard Wallace longer than most to get through his kitchen door.
Oh! Oh! Oh, okay. Oh, you're filming this.
Richard is one of the country's most extreme hoarders.
Someone said to me the other day, did I live here? I said, no, I exist here.
Well, a Surrey man who is hoarding tons of rubbish in his garden.
I think the other thing to think about is that, going back to the beginning, that people and possessions have a complex relationship, and we're actually surrounded by organisational hoarding, Shabnam. So if you think about offices, hoarding does not just take place in houses, it's in the world around us. So you might want to think about scrapyards, or you might want to think even such as Phenomena as the world's largest US Air Force and aircraft graveyard in the United States.
We've got a little video.
And we've got a little video of that now.
The largest plane graveyard in the world, where more than 4,400 aircraft are collecting dust in the Arizona desert, can now be explored in intricate detail. This is the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, commonly known as the Boneyard, where the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group, AMARG, takes care of disused warplanes and fighter jets.
So I think it's important to think, Shabnam, that we actually mediate our lives through objects, and sometimes that does go wrong, and it goes wrong on a domestic level, but it also goes wrong on an organisational level as well. And the other thing is that the cave is almost an irony for me, because it's a form of containment, but it's also something that's very, very risky.
Yes, yeah. And I liked immediately, once you were talking about the cave, and in the video you saw Richard Wallace coming out.
Yes.
You know, that was his cave, wasn't it, Martin?
Yes,
yeah.
And you think about the risks of going into that kind of environment, and you'd also think about an environmental health officer would say, or a member of the fire service or the London Ambulance Service.
Absolutely.
They would all bring a different bearing, and I think a professional value on that environment.
Yeah. That kind of nicely brings us on to the next chapter, which is the challenges. Let's talk about some of the challenges to this work. Again, we're going to show you some photographs. So, is it easy going into environments like this, Martin?
Well, I don't think it is. And one of the things that attracted me to the research in practice for adults on working with equal self-neglect, it says, as we said at the beginning, that this work gets under the skin in a way that leaves us feeling distressed and emotionally drained and exposed.
Exactly.
And one of the quotes there was, she would say, well, why am I here at 6:30 when everyone else is at home? How, you know, who knows that I'm here? I feel very unsafe in this environment.
Exactly. So it's, do we feel safe? Do we feel we have the skills? How do we feel when we go home?
And I think, Shabnam, that's the importance as well of supervision of us feeling contained.
Absolutely.
When we're going into this environment. And let's remember that it's not something that we're suddenly going to do. We're going to need to engage with that client, bring up rapport, and then go in.
And we're going to cover all of those, isn't it? So do we really feel we have the support and understanding of our managers? You know, are our organisations aligned to supporting frontline practitioners? Are there showers in our workplace, for example? Is there flexibility to work from home and, you know, take a shower once we've done this visit?
That's a very good point. And the other point is that why isn't pest control involved in training for people that are working with hoarders?
Exactly.
Because we need to protect ourselves.
And that's exactly what I was saying. Do we have the right advice from our housing and environmental health colleague, the training?
And the other thing, of course, is that, again, going back to supervision, we need that supervision for reflection and supporting longevity and innovation and creativity when we're working with people who are struggling.
Absolutely. And we're going to cover supervision quite in detail at the end. So, you know, I'm just thinking about walking on those sticky carpets, potentially walking away with the cockroach eggs attached to your shoes.
Yes.
I mean, it's
yes, absolutely, and the risk. In this photograph here, the gentleman is actually standing on, I think, about half a metre of newspapers. It's not a good environment to be in. You can sometimes hear rodents or something moving around in
absolutely. That nicely brings us into our final picture there of the rodent. So, you know, Martin, there's a question that we started floating around in our research group, didn't we? Should everyone in the team do this work, or should there be a specialist team where people who are trained and want to do this work? So you remember our housing colleague was saying to us, you know, there's some housing officers that don't have a problem when they go in, they can go in. Others literally, don't like it, scream.
I think that's a really good question, Shabnam, and I think that the hoarding and self-neglect cries out for integrated working. It cries out for working as a team when you go into the property for safety. And that if, for example, you're with a community psychiatric nurse or with an environmental health officer, or it really is a form of team working that will be far more likely to be successful.
Absolutely, and that's what research says. So again, another challenge is, like you mentioned, our safety. How safe do we feel? I watched a YouTube video the other day, and it was of a social worker in America who was going to see a lady because of hoarding, and she couldn't get in. The lady pulled a big gun out on her, you know.
Yes.
So again, it's for us, it's safety things falling on you. And you know, I know you have an example here, don't you, Martin, where something made the press.
What actually happened is that I'm actually thinking the first thing I would think about is the enormous escalation of emails and the anxieties of other professionals, which yourself as a social worker must you know get to grips with. But the other thing is that one of my clients, unfortunately, lived in a very, very hoarded property, and we had great difficulty engaging with her. Found her eventually by the recycling bin, started working with her. She agreed to a clear out. She lived in a multi-occupancy dwelling which caught fire and killed one of the residents in the building, and it made the national press channels. Fortunately, not, you know, or unfortunately, it actually wasn't her. It was actually the electricity supply in the building. But nonetheless, the risk of that happening was.
And I know we both had complaints against us as well, because it's really difficult when you work with someone and they agree, but then later they say, oh, actually, they don't want to work with you, and then they say no. Well, my item's gone missing, and it can be really challenging for practitioners.
Yeah.
So,
I personally have experienced several complaints from people who are hoarding as a way of kicking back and keeping me away from the property.
Yeah. So it's a real dilemma, isn't it? So on the one side, we've got people who are reluctant to engage. So we know that it's really difficult to engage with people who are hoarding and self-neglecting. And then on the other side, we've got our organisational pressures. So we're receiving new work all the time. Yeah. So what ends up happening is research suggests is that we end up closing the case. You know, or someone doesn't open the door to us, we've tried, and then we move on because we've got other people to see. And this is described by Professor Michael Christensen as the perfect storm, really, and you can see why. And again, like I mentioned earlier about the revolving door, the same people coming in again and again, really makes you think, what's happening here? Are we working with them in the right way?
And this takes... It takes a lot of work through duty, the same people, as you say, going round again and again, and us actually feeling that we're not getting anywhere because of the recidivism.
Absolutely. So realistically, this is time-intensive work, yes, Martin. There is no other way to put it. Case management systems don't work. No. Time is needed to build rapport and trust. Yep. Persistence is needed to get through the threshold and build that relationship. There are some of the challenges. These are some of the challenges that we've talked about. Of course, there's probably other challenges, and particularly for our health colleagues. There's been a serious case reviews in Isle of Wight, and they really highlight the challenges for district nurses as well, who are trying to go in and provide the care. So sort of having talked about some of the challenges, I think we want to move on really and talk about how we work with people then in a meaningful way. And what Professor Michael Christensen says is working with self-neglect and hoarding involves an interplay between the three following elements: the knowing, the being, and the doing. And he describes these as the three olives in a glass of martini. So, Martin, what I'd really like to do is bring this alive. Sure. The knowing, the being, and the doing. So I wanted you to tell me about the knowing, Martin.
Would it be all right if I discuss the client I work with Robert?
The Kit Kat.
Okay, absolutely.
We're going to talk about Kit Kat.
Absolutely. Let's go to the Kit Kat. As you can see, we started with the Kit Kat in front of us. This was no coincidence. The origin of the Kit Kat dates back to 1935, and it was a 4-finger wafer crisp chocolate bar, and it was launched in London. And back then it wasn't known as the Kit Kat, but it was known as Rowntree's Chocolate Crisp. And it was renamed to Kit Kat Chocolate Crisp 2 years later. And then Rowntree, yes, please have one, dropped the chocolate crisp after World War II. And during World War II, the flavour for the product changed, and because milk and sugar wasn't so available. And so due to those food shortages, it resulted in alterations in the recipe, and it took on a blue wrapping, which you can see here. After the war, it took back its original milk-based recipe and its red packaging, which you know. So the name appears Kit Kat, appears to come from the Kit Kat Club in London, and Kit Kat was a name for pies. So Kit Kat became Rowntree's leading product. Within 2 years it's launched, and it remained a top product in the Rowntree's family ever since. Now, this is the material history, the life of a material object that's also edible, but also one of my clients had many wholesale boxes of Kit Kats under his table. He was hoarding Kit Kats. Now, the object itself has a complex history and cultural identity, and that might link into the sentimentality and become part of us, a meaningful reminder for the client of his father, who used to buy him Kit Kats on the way home from work. He talked about the machines that used to sell them at Victoria Station, and to just get rid of them is for that client is actually like losing a close friend. So you might think, you know, of our own reactions on a particularly stressful day. You know, I just want to go home and gather my things, my treasures around me, and eat my Kit Kats and drink tea. So possessions themselves provide a source of comfort and security, and they might actually signal a safe environment.
Absolutely, Martin. So I think what's really key here, coming back to the knowing, is finding the person. And that's what you did, Martin. Through the Kit Kat, you found the person's, you got an insight into their life, into their history, into what matters to them. You know, so in the example you gave with the Kit Kat, it's interesting because it signified an attachment to the object and a memory. So it was the memory of his father buying him the Kit Kat, and perhaps a fear of losing the item again, because if they stopped selling it, that would feel like a loss again. So it's I think what you did there and how to bring that knowing alive is about finding the person, and how do we find the person is through finding out about the history.
And you know what,
it
Shabnam,
signifies.
it's respecting the importance that client placed on his boxes of Kit Kats and why they
What
were
it meant to
important
him. What it meant to him, yeah. And I know you link in kind of Freud here, don't you, Martin?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I was just thinking that with many of the people that I work with, they do seem to have been very upset by losses many years ago, and it has suggested to me that something has gone a little bit astray, and it might be that some of the troubles with the stuff, with the hoarding, might be rooted in a failure to mourn the losses, and that might be a reason why we should go back and look at Freud's work on mourning and melancholia. And of course, Freud was saying that if we don't mourn properly, if we tend to turn against ourselves, and that perhaps with the hoarder, that when we turn against ourselves, it's a form of melancholia, and that, you know, many of the clients who are, you know, very distressed represent themselves to us as worthless, incapable of any achievement, perhaps being morally despicable. So I think it might be worth looking at some form of failure of mourning and revisiting Freud.
Okay, Martin, that's great. An interesting research area for future research. And as social workers, we're always hypothesizing, aren't we? So let's talk about the being then, Martin. So we have a video to to show, don't we? Yeah, let's talk about the next olive. So we're going to show you a clip now, which will hopefully demonstrate what we mean by being.
And here's every clock radio I've ever owned, calculators, VHS tapes, sporting equipment.
You have sporting equipment?
Well, it's a golf ball that my brother threw at my head. You can still feel the dent. It's right next to the hockey puck dent.
Okay, why do you have a bin of pine cones?
I used to collect them as a child. The spiral of scales open in the Fibonacci sequence. A fact that when you tell your brother gets a golf ball thrown at your head.
So why do you feel you need to save these things?
I'd like to say it's nostalgia, but every time I think of throwing anything away, my ears start to ring and I get butterflies in my stomach. And then it feels like the butterflies get eaten by rats. And then the rats get eaten by...
Okay, I get it.
It ends with dinosaurs. I'm sorry if you think less of me.
I don't.
Really? Because every time I come in here, I think less of me.
Why?
Because I'm a fraud. No, I purport to be a man of the mind. I've been such a vocal champion of the singularity, but how can I leave my body behind and become one with the internet when I've never even thrown a toothbrush away?
It's okay, Sheldon. You know, I've saved a lot of weird things too.
Like what?
Well, did you know I have a microscope slide with a little bit of tissue from the first brain I ever dissected?
I have an old teddy bear I secretly wipe my nose on for years.
It's not a contest. So no one else knows about this?
Only you.
Thank you for trusting me.
What good is having a girlfriend if you can't unload your psychological sewage on her?
That's me, your emotional outhouse. You know, if you ever decide you want to do something about this, I'm here for you.
Thank you. I wouldn't even know how to begin.
Baby steps, I guess.
I suppose I could try getting rid of the golf ball.
Oh, okay.
I will always have the dent to remember it by.
You did it. Do you feel okay?
Actually, yes. I do.
Well, I'm proud of you.
Thanks.
That was great, wasn't it, Martin? I mean, this clip is relevant in so many ways. But the one thing that I wanted to draw out from it was the communication, the importance of the non-verbal and the verbal. She was respectful, she was present, she was curious and observant, and she connected with him.
Absolutely. And the other thing I just wanted to mention was I really like the question, why do you feel you need to watch these things? And there's a book by J.P. Smith on mammalian behaviour, the theory and science, and he actually speculates that the sight of a nut puts the squirrel in touch with the feeling of being hungry, and without out a lot. And so for the hoarder, the sight of the possession puts him in touch with feeling and being without the possession and needing it. What I thought was really good about that clip, as you say, if you think of the strength-based approach, the practice framework and the practice handbook from the Department of Health and Social Care, they talk about, you know, everything she showed, effective, as you say, effective communication skills, listening, empathy, curiosity, and it was very professional, actually, curiosity. So I think we can learn a lot from that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Being Martin, the being Olive, is also about our assessment, isn't it? It's about what do we smell? What do we see? What aren't we allowed to see? Where aren't we allowed to go? This is all formulating our risk assessment. Professor Michael President again refers to a really good, I really like this term which he uses, is asking the care-frontational questions.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really important, and also I think part of being is also standing still. It's such an important role as a social worker, I feel. It's where trust is built. It's possibly the time when you're being silently creative because you're allowing the space. You're not closing the door. You're actually standing still with the person. You've paused. And this is a really important time, as I myself am a manager, is to recognize that it's not the time to close the case. Don't rush to close the case. And it's really important to discuss it in supervision and not to be alone with it. And I love the next quote on the next slide from Alice in Wonderland. When you can't look on the bright side, I will stand with you in the dark. So being is really about how we embed what we know, the first Olive, but also being is what is going to help us to know.
Yes.
So that's what I meant about the interconnectedness between the three Olives. All the skills utilised when we are being shape the relationship, Martin, doesn't it? And it shows respect, empathy, being present, and most importantly, most importantly, being human, which is an essential trait for frontline practitioners. So, Martin, should we quickly talk about the doing? We've done the knowing, the being, and let's do the doing through our quick sort of 1 minute stories.
Okay, I just wanted to...
So we've got our first, sorry Martin, we've got our first story, which is hurry slowly.
So I just wanted to mention about a client I worked with who was in a severely hoarded room, absolutely covered with old books, and the walls were completely yellow from cigarette smoking. The client had multiple cirrhosis. He hadn't had a shower for years. And I think what I learned to do with this client was that I learned to listen to his story and to change the story. So I learned that the books were very important to him. And what we did is we applied for a grant with the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and we actually took the books and we put them and we made a library. And by making the library, we managed to clear up and repaint and decorate the entire room. We did it all with external grants from the Multiple Sclerosis Society and from Hampton and Wells. And we kind of kept his story, which was the books, but we also managed to edit those books and to clear out the hoarded things that caused the functional impairment.
So Martin, we called this hurry slowly because clearly it didn't happen in a matter of weeks, did it?
No, it didn't.
Exactly.
It took at least 8 months to do that.
And that's the key. That's the key, isn't it? Doing it requires time. So you went over a minute, but doesn't matter. I'll give you the next story is zone of tolerance. So that's my story really. So I worked with a gentleman who was self-neglecting, his personal hygiene and he hadn't washed his hair for years, and also his home environment. And I worked with this gentleman. It was really interesting because I put in my diary. I knew somehow that he wasn't going to see me immediately. So I booked several visits in my diary at various times, something I've learned from you, Martin. And I was persistent. And the first visit when I went, he didn't let me in. Second time I went, he spoke to me at the door for maybe 3 minutes. And then a few days later, I went again, and I actually got invited in, and maybe 15 minutes into the conversation, right, get out now. So, that was his zone of tolerance. But surprisingly, or not surprisingly, maybe 3 weeks down the line, I was sitting with him in his flat, and his zone of tolerance had shifted. So what I'm saying is it's really important to work with people in their zone of tolerance and understand their zone of tolerance. And he accepted to have help with cleaning of his property. And like the knowing, when I got behind the reason of why he didn't wash his hair was a near drowning experience. He didn't like water on his hair. So we ordered a interesting shower cap from one of the shopping things, and it had dry shampoo, and he agreed to have a hair wash. So his zone of tolerance, like the research and practice adults guidance you referred to, talks about shifting responses.
Yes.
People's responses do shift. They can be unpredictable. So that's where the being still, standing still, is where you're working with them around their zone of tolerance. So our next 1 minute story is honesty, Martin. How important is honesty?
One of the things you taught me, Shabnam, is the use of silence and honesty, and working with the client's consent. It's very useful to go into the client's property, to take photographs with your work phone, and to then print those photographs out and present the photographs with the clutter image rating, which is useful, and then ask the client to compare their photographs of their property with the clutter image rating, and that has a very good effect.
Okay, so our final story is windows of opportunities. And that's an example that I've taken from research, actually. And I really like this example because it highlights how important windows of opportunities are when people are self-neglecting and hoarding. So this was a lady who was hoarding and wasn't engaging at all. And then she got some pests in her home. So she phoned up the council's pest control team and said, look, please come and do a clear out. I'm happy for you to do a deep clean. And they said, unfortunately, there's a waiting list. We'll get back to you in about 2 to 3 weeks. And of course, when they did, and the adult social work team had been trying to find a way in to work with this lady, but because the two didn't speak to each other, then when pest control did call 3 weeks, they said, I've sorted the problem, don't come now. So it's about, again, going back to our systems. Do we have the systems that talk to each other internally in our organisations? Are our organisations alive?
And seizing the opportunity when it presents itself.
So I've just seen a really interesting comment there. Can you please repeat the taking, comparing photo? So we are going to cover that again. Martin's going to talk about that in some detail when we talk about practical tools. So we'll come back to that. So just to bring together, Martin, the 3 olives, the knowing, the being, the doing. So it's really about how we engage, interact, what creative or what simple methods we might be using. I think for me, it echoes principles of making safeguarding personal. It's about doing is also about knowing our legal roots, but most importantly, it's about showing respect for self-determination and human rights. So, Martin, what do people who hoard or self-neglect say they find helpful?
Well, they say taking the time to understand us, avoid making us feel defensive, focus on us as people rather than just our problems, show a sense of timing, recognizing when we might be ready to change, and move at our pace. Be very careful to avoid body language or comments. Holding your hand to your face is, when things are very smelly, is a natural response. So is to say very quickly, oh, you've got a lot of stuff, but it actually seems quite judgmental and it can seem to be insulting. Be honest about the possibility of imposed measures. talking about environmental health, for example, might assist you, but avoid presenting those measures as threats to get immediate compliance. Find the balance between encouragement and pushiness.
So Martin, it's really important for us to hear that and take note. That's as people with lived experience and experience how they're experiencing us. So I think that's really, really key. So I'm really conscious of time because we've still got quite a lot to cover. So I'm gonna go through this quite quickly, the legal side of things. Remember, this is recorded, so you will have an opportunity to look at the slides later again. So in terms of some of the key points to do with legislation, of course it's important to know what the Care Act 2014 says in relation to self-neglect. But just knowing what the Care Act says is not enough. We need to refer to the Department and Health Social Care Guidance, Chapter 14 on adult safeguarding. Central to self-neglect are principles of well-being.
Yes.
Yes, Martin?
Absolutely. And you know, the brief thing I'd say on that is that suitability of living accommodation and personal dignity, protection from abuse and neglect, also physical, mental and emotional well-being, social and economic well-being, controlled by the individual over day-to-day life. And the one I really like, participation in work, education, training or recreation. Now, if you're a child and you're living with somebody who's hoarding or self-neglect, it's very difficult to find a place to do your homework, for example. So I think we need to think about those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And obviously the Care Act places the central tenet of the Care Act around protection and prevention. And local authorities are obligated to prevent and delay the development of care and support needs under the Care Act. And just think about how your organisation is doing this, and if so, how. Again, I mean, just in terms of self-neglect, it's now a category of harm, accompanying the other categories. I mean, if Michael Preston Shute says, if you're hearing the same name coming through again, and if you're having sleepless nights, then open the Section 42. You know, get the support you require, work with it through a multidisciplinary lens. It's really important.
And I think having a planning meeting is so important for this work and bringing everybody together.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think also in terms we should be opening up concerns. This is my personal view, because it makes us data rich as a borough. We understand how many concerns we are receiving under this new category of self-neglect. Just the next slide quickly, that it's, again, I won't go through these, but they're there. It's important, Martin, to be aware of the possible enforcement action that we may need to take, working alongside our housing colleagues, the environmental health. You saw in the video the hoarding of animals, so the animal welfare, RSPC. So it's just important to be mindful, and there is a variety of legislation that can be supportive, although it may feel quite punitive.
And just to say on that, it is very useful if you know a friendly environmental health officer, and at Camden we have our own Toby Deans to actually go along when they're getting a warrant for something that's filthy and verminous, and to go along to the court and see what kind of evidence they have to put before the court before they get the warrant.
Yeah. So that's there on the slide for you to refer to. Next slide, I'll go through this quickly again. It's learning from the SARS, which are safeguarding adult reviews. And for those of us that don't know, this is when an adult dies as a result of abuse or neglect, and there are concerns that the partner agencies could have worked better together. So there have been several SARS, and there is a SARS library. But some of the themes and some of the major learning that's come out is, you know, too accepting of a lifestyle choice, you know, and an insufficient professional curiosity, a failure to kind of escalate concerns to senior managers, delays in raising the concerns, no agreed strategies to engage, poor record keeping and decision making, a real failure to think family, to think network, how are they important, not sufficient account of persons' feelings and wishes, and poor communication between professionals. and lack of systems that support that really. And there's also mental capacity and risk assessments not being robust. And that brings me on to the next point really, which I wanted to spend a little bit of time on. That's a beautiful picture drawn by my 11-year-old niece. And what it describes really is what Alex Rakeen, who's a barrister and a lead thinker around mental capacity, calls cliff edge. So you can see that someone's standing at the edge of a cliff. Now, as a social worker, we're often shifting between these two sort of paradigms where if we deem the person to have capacity, then is that an unwise decision that they're standing so close to the edge, and do we then walk away and respect that choice? Or, on the other side, if we deem them to lack capacity, do we want them to fall into the paternal embrace? And do we want to just wrap them in cotton wool and make decisions for them which we think are best? So, I mean, I can resonate. I'm sure other practitioners can. And what's important here comes back to reflection, is really, really reflecting on your orientation and where you sit. Because we all have views, strong views of what we think is acceptable in society and what's unacceptable. But remember, that shifts between cultures, between religions, between societies, between communities. So I really like that concept of cliff edge that Alex talks about. So some of the challenges, when we were talking about challenges, I left mental capacity out because I wanted to cover it here. Some of the challenges we have, Martin, is, can I do the information test if there isn't an impairment? What about someone's human rights versus the human rights of the neighbours? Fluctuating capacity is always difficult. And then, as we said, people who self-neglect and hoard are hard to engage, hard to reach. Sometimes the spoken word is very, very strong. So it's actually quite difficult to do a capacity assessment. We've got the challenge of, is it mental capacity versus mental health act, or is it mental capacity and mental health act? And we will have people who have capacity and who continue to put themselves in grave danger. So those are some of the challenges. So if I quickly talk about some of the ways we can address some of these challenges, and I know we do this and other practitioners do this, is which will ensure that our mental capacity work is robust, it's strengths-based, and it's reflective of the core principles of the Capacity Act, really. So coming to the information versus the impairment, you'll see, so the MCA code is very, very clear. If there are concerning behaviours, this paves the way to start having the conversation and tease out capacity, because it's the information test that may actually lead to the impairment, particularly as you do, Martin. You do them jointly with psychiatrists or psychologists or the GP, so you get a view. Of course, what's important to remember is the causative nexus, that the impairment is the reason that's causing the incapacity for the decision that you're assessing. We talked about human rights versus public human rights. Here I would say that a robust risk assessment is crucial. So not only considering the risk to the person, Martin, but also considering the risk to the wider public if it's becoming a public interest issue. Another really important aspect to think about in mental capacity is the timing of the MCA. So Martin, what's the first question that a manager asks when you come back and says, I've just seen someone who's really self-neglecting or haunting? What's the first question that you're asked in relation to capacity?
What, have they got it?
Yes, have you done a capacity assessment?
Where's the capacity assessment?
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, what I think is we need to ask a different question.
Yeah.
I think we need to say, is it vital to consider a mental capacity at this point?
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is at times we may not be able to delay the capacity assessment, maybe hospital discharge. What we can delay is any restrictive action, of course, through the best interest, if the person's deemed to lack capacity. But there are other times when an MCA is not actually going to add any value at that point, and building the relationship is going to add far more value, because you're going to understand from the history of the person, how they communicate, who the other important people in their life are, what the context is, and who to perhaps. It's the principle too of the Capacity Act, isn't
Supporting
it?
people through the decision.
Absolutely, it's principle two.
Yeah.
And one really simple example I wanted to give here was a colleague of mine was doing a capacity assessment, And she was talking to the gentleman and his wife was there, and she was saying, do you have carers? And he went, carers? No. And then the wife whispered, say helpers. And the moment she changed it to helpers, the narrative, yes, he said, oh, yes, the girls come in twice a day. So it's that important, thinking about the timing of the MCA and why and how we do it, bringing in other people. I'll quickly move on to executive capacity. So just in the previous slide, it's still in the previous slide, but this is the show me, which our OT colleagues do really, really well, Martin, don't they?
It's about not being abstract, isn't it? It's about let's see the practicality of that.
Yes, yeah. And I particularly like that, I know it's not enshrined in the law yet, we have decisional capacity only, but I like it and it's worked for me. And I particularly like the case law, GW versus LA, I think it's 2014, where a lady with Huntington's goes into a care home, is deprived of her liberty. She says, her spoken word is very strong and says, no, I want to leave the premises unescorted. So the judge then says, okay, let's do a test here. Let's observe, allow her to go out unescorted, but not unobserved. So the capacity, executive capacity is tested, and the DOLS is agreed. She is deprived of her liberty, unfortunately. So I think it is important, and it's an area which is debated at the moment. Also, another point around is decisions and questions, is how are we framing the question? So I think it's really important to think about. Yeah, we'll come to that. Thank you, Simona. Just seen a question there about, can you please give us an example of a person who lacks capacity and holds? So I'll finish this off, and hopefully just at the end, we will try to answer your question. So just in terms of the question, it's really important to frame our question correctly. So this is an example. Does P possess the capacity for self-care and self-protection? And then what's also really important is the questions that we design to test that decision. So I see so many capacity assessments where the questions are actually irrelevant to the decision in question, Martin. So you're really trying to find out is, can they extract themselves from these harmful situations? So we really need to be thinking about the art of the question. I just wanted to make the final point about capacity is that if you're concerned about someone's capacity but cannot get one done, then you can apply to the Court of Protection. And obviously, if a person is deemed to have capacity, the other challenge we spoke about is risk of serious harm of death. We've got the inherent jurisdiction route. Obviously, these are all very big topics that we could spend quite a long time on.
And just to chip in very quickly on the question. We just had an interesting question about somebody who doesn't have capacity and who hoards. Well, I'm working with a gentleman at the moment who's an ex-actor, and he hoards all sorts of things, gets all sorts of things from Portobello markets, being trading, and he has dementia, has diagnosis of dementia. The hoarding's getting a lot worse. One of the things that I would say, and if you're listening from London Borough of Camden, this is absolutely ideal for a family group conference. Send in a referral to Tim Fisher and let kind of hand those decisions over to the life work of the client and the family of the client, and work and formulate a plan around the client.
Absolutely, Martin. I echo that very strongly. So we've just put 2 quotes in the pack for you, but we won't go into them. Maybe you can look at them in your team meetings and discuss them. Moving on then, because I'm really conscious of time, is we want to share with you the practical tools to support practice. So we'll come back to the photographs in this. So Martin, over to you. So what tell me about some of the practical tools you use, Martin.
Well, I just find the clutter image rating scale extremely effective, and you might want to do it yourselves. And when you do it, you might want to think about, what your kitchen is like at Christmas, for example, and how far up on the scale it is, or what it's like on a bad day or a good day. But it's very good as as a guide for how bad things are getting in terms of functional impairment. And then in terms of photographs, if we look at the next slide, if we look at
The next one.
yeah, if we can see, this is kitchen. It's pretty high up, possibly a 7 or 8 on the clutter image rating. And I think talking through the slide with the client and saying, well, how would you use a cooker? What are the dangers? What are the risks there? How would you get to the sink? Oh, your actual sink, your tap doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Why can't the plumber, why can't she or he actually get there? And talking through it is very important. But also with photography, I love before and after photographs.
So the next one.
So this is the same kitchen after we've cleaned it out, and actually in a strength-based approach, sharing that with the client is saying, well, look what we've done, and also reminding them, well, perhaps it's not good to go back to how it was, but let's try and keep this as a standard. Is a very useful tool.
And then something else, Martin, that you wanted to share about the 10-day challenge.
And also this is good for us all, actually. We might want to think about a 10-day challenge, and you can do this yourselves, and it's about for every day from 1 to 10 to get rid of one thing in your life that doesn't make much sense. It could be that pile of newspapers, the magazines, all those coats you haven't used, the 7 deodorants in your bathroom, and to get rid of them all. And of course, the golden step is the first one, and you might want to just write out really what the first thing now that you will get rid of in your home or property. So,
and you use that, don't you, with the people that you work alongside, Martin?
Absolutely. So I use it. I've got it here. It's like an envelope with a stamp on it, and I ask them to send it to the minimalists, which we'll talk about in a minute, at the Recovery College, which we'll also talk about in a minute, and to put the first object that they get rid of, and then we lead into the 10-day challenge.
Wonderful. So you mentioned the minimalist, Martin.
Yeah, the minimalists are these 2 blokes, inverted commas, from Arizona, and I think they're really important because they're about an intentional life, and they're about the opportunities available to us if we have a life of less consumption and less functional impairment. And there is a documentary on YouTube that you might want on Netflix that you might want to have a look at. The other thing you might want to have a look at, there are Recovery College courses funded by Health, usually but not always based in hospital settings. The courses are open and free for everyone, and the emphasis also on learning together. And the really good thing is they have 3 key words: hope, opportunity, and control. And they're co-created courses, so they have somebody who actually has experienced, for example, hoarding themselves, teaching with a professional alongside, and the courses are open to professionals and people who struggle, for example, in hoarding with stuff themselves. So I think if you're working with somebody and you think about buying, you think about taking the things away, it's great to refer somebody to the Recovery College to link them in with it, and then liaise with the Recovery College and see what's happening. And we've been quite successful, I think, in the clients that we've
absolutely. It links very nicely with the wellbeing, doesn't it? The one you were mentioning earlier.
It does. Participation in work, education, training, or recreation. Absolutely.
So, we'll skip that one. Go to the next one. So, Martin, thank you for sharing your practice wisdom on that. That's great. So another tool, a very important tool that I think is highly essential when working alongside people who self-neglect and hoard, is good quality supervision. And I'm very pleased that earlier this month, a national program to raise the quality and consistency of supervision was launched. So as mentioned earlier, I don't think staff should be left alone with this work. They need the space and time to reflect, to discuss, to feel heard, to feel supported, and no better place than that than supervision. So I'm really interested in emotions, as you know, Martin, and I've developed an emotional tool because I think we need to bring emotions safely back into supervision, into social work, and I've got a quote there. But I also think that in supervision you can use tools like, for example, this one. You might ask staff, as managers we have responsibility, so where they think they are in relation to work with Mrs. X, where would they like to be? Could they put 3 emotions next to that blob that they're saying that they are?
And that supports reflection and innovation as well, doesn't it?
We'll come back to that. Yeah. So in terms of the next slide, again, I think for supervision, it's you could use this wonderful tool. It's about being legally literate. We have to be legally literate. So it's about looking at the law. How have we considered all pathways? The principles. How are we looking at well-being here? Rights, human rights, standards. Is our intervention what other 95% of other work practitioners would engage? And how does case law inform our practice? So this really helps us to look and reflect at the piece of what we're doing and maybe things that we're missing. The next slide is another tool which is in the great resource of research and practice for adults. It's the good decision-making tool, and it's around, looking at your work with your manager and thinking, have we taken all reasonable steps? Are we being proactive? Are we being investigative? So there's many tools that you can bring to supervision. One of the tools when I mentioned I became interested in self-neglect about 5 years ago, I devised a tool, and what this tool is doing is it's bringing together all the things we've spoken about today: the knowing, the being, the doing, the capacity, the law, and it's like. Perhaps you could use it when I've used it various ways. I'm using it at the moment, supporting a staff member who's working with someone, but also at the end of, when you're about to close something. Just the next slide, it shows, what are we doing how are we going to review this? What are the appropriate others that we need to inform? What doors are we opening in case of moments of motivation?
The thing I like about this tool is it's actually like a roadmap, and you can pause it and go back or go forward. So I think it's very effective.
So that's another tool that you've got access to now. So I guess it's kind of time for us to summarize, because we're nearly out of time. So, Martin, self-neglect and hoarding, it remains one of the most difficult areas in human services profession and indeed social work.
And as it says, there are no easy solutions or quick fixes. We're not fixers, we're not rescuers, we're just doing our best.
It is multifaceted, and complex, and it can remain hidden for a long time.
And it's also is and can become a public health issue, and we should always think about the neighbours, particularly in multi-occupancy dwellings.
And given its association with cognitive impairment, loneliness and mental health, it is an area expected to increase significantly given the rise in the ageing population.
And I think it's an area that requires diverse skills and resources, and actually ourselves as active social researchers. And it's best approached through an integrated MDT lens, which brings insight and resources and also supports us as practitioners.
Absolutely. And we really need to use the various models that strengths-based practice offers. So that's the next slide. There's a variety of models, and there's no one model that will be perfect. All models have their strengths and weaknesses. I wanted to really highlight again family group conferencing. I think that's key, and a growing area and a growing resource that we need to utilize. It's a real strengths-based way of an approach. So I've got a variety of approaches there, and then just our final slide, really, we'd like to end on a lovely quote.
So love people and use stuff, because the opposite never works.
And we wanted to say a big thank you to, which is in the next slide, Middlesex University, particularly Carl Chandra, Senior Lecturer, for giving us the opportunity to be here today. Professor Michael Preston-Shute, whose research we've kind of referred to today. Sally Neiman, our critical eye, and Simona, who's been helping on the technical side. Thank you, Simona, and Richard back in Camden, who helped me put all this together, really. So thank you very much. We really hope that you've taken something away today. Our emails are there. You can contact us. You can drop us an email. I'm on Twitter, and we really look forward to hearing from you, because we're both not experts, but we're both really passionate practitioners. And as you hopefully we've evidenced today, we have a real strong interest in this area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.